My name is Harlan Quinn, and I am 68 years old. Most people in my neighborhood know me as the quiet man who still mows his own lawn and fixes things that no one else bothers to repair anymore. I worked with my hands all my life: wood, bricks, metal, anything that could hold a house together. I built homes for families I would never meet, walls that would shelter laughter, sorrow, and memories that didn't belong to me. Maybe that's why it stung so much when my own son acted like I didn't know what real value meant. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. It was late afternoon when I arrived at his new house. The air smelled of fresh paint and new money. I had driven 4 hours just to see it, because he sounded proud over the phone. "Wait till you see the place, Dad," he'd said. I was proud too, proud that he'd made something of himself. But when he opened the door, his smile faded almost as soon as it appeared. His eyes moved to the dust on my work boots, then to the polished floors behind him. "Dad, don't touch anything," he said quickly. "It's expensive." I paused, thinking maybe he was joking, but his tone stayed flat. The laughter that used to come easy between us had disappeared somewhere between his rise and my retirement. I gave him a small nod, stepped inside, and sat quietly in the corner of the living room. The house looked like a picture from a magazine: white walls, shining marble, and furniture that looked too fragile to sit on. I noticed the curve of the staircase, the pattern of the tiles in the kitchen, and the crown molding near the ceiling. Every part of it reminded me of projects I had worked on years ago. Strange, I thought, how familiar it all seemed. As the evening went on, guests began to arrive: his friends from the city, a few neighbors, and a woman with too much perfume who kept calling him an inspiration. They sat around the long dining table, sipping wine that probably cost more than my old pickup. When dinner was served, my son raised his glass and said, "I bought this place myself." Everyone clapped. The woman beside him beamed with pride. I just smiled, quietly chewing the food on my plate. He didn't see me glance at the wall behind him, where a framed document hung slightly crooked. I knew the look of those papers: the ink, the layout, the small golden seal in the corner. I'd signed one just like it 6 months earlier. But I said nothing. Pride can make a man deaf to reason, and that night I realized he wasn't ready to hear anything that didn't fit the picture he was painting for his guests. After dinner, he showed everyone the view from the backyard, the manicured lawn, the lights outlining the deck. I stood a few steps behind, watching him talk about mortgage rates, property, value, and renovations he planned for the spring. Every word built a wall between us, and I didn't try to stop him. Sometimes silence teaches more than speeches ever could. When I finally left that night, the sky was clear and the air sharp. As I drove away, I thought of something my late wife used to say: "Let them learn by the truth that finds them." I didn't plan revenge or anger. I only wanted him to see what real ownership looked like, not the kind written on paper, but the kind written in love and sacrifice. And by morning, that lesson would arrive without a single word from me. The next morning, the sun was already shining through my thin curtains when I woke up. I had slept lightly, the way older men do, half dreaming, half listening to the house breathe. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, a message from my son, just a single line: "Thanks for coming, Dad. No heart, no warmth, just polite distance." I smiled at it anyway. He had always been careful with his words, afraid to sound soft. I could tell he was still trying to prove something, though I wasn't sure to whom anymore. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The old clock on the wall ticked in a slow, familiar rhythm. I looked around my small living room, the scratched wooden table, the chair with one leg that creaked, the faded photograph of my wife smiling in her garden. This was my world, worn down but honest. Every item in it had a story, a memory, a piece of me. That house of his, shiny and perfect, had none of that yet. It only had price tags, The phone rang again, and I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick it up. The voice on the other end was polite and professional. "Good morning, Mr. Quinn. This is Amber from Whitegate Realty. I just wanted to confirm the gift transfer has been processed." I said, "Yes, I understand. Thank you." My voice was calm, though a small ache pressed behind my ribs. "And, sir," she added, "should we inform the new owner today?" I took a slow breath. "Yes," I said softly. "Call him this morning. He should know." When the call ended, I sat there for a long moment, coffee cooling beside me. I thought about the day I'd decided to buy that house, not for me, but for him. He had been struggling then, drowning in rent and pride. He wouldn't take help if I offered it, so I found another way. I purchased the property quietly under my company's name and waited. When he said he had finally found the perfect house, I made sure it was that one. I wanted him to have a fresh start, something stable, something he could be proud of. I never wanted credit for it. I just wanted him to feel like he'd made it. But yesterday showed me that sometimes pride can turn into blindness. Watching him talk about his house while I sat at that table, it didn't make me angry. It made me sad, because I had once been that proud too. I remembered the years when I wouldn't let anyone help me, even when my back gave out from working double shifts. Maybe that's where he got it from. I stood up, poured out the cold coffee, and grabbed my jacket. The air outside carried the scent of winter's edge. Somewhere across town, my son was probably still sleeping, wrapped in fine sheets, believing the world was finally his. In a few minutes, the phone beside his bed would ring, and when he answered, his world would shift, not in punishment, but in truth. By the time the sun climbed high, I knew the call had already been made. I could almost imagine the moment. The confusion in my son's voice when he answered, the pause when the realtor mentioned the gift, and the quiet that followed. It wasn't anger I wanted him to feel. It was realization. Sometimes the truth arrives not as thunder, but as a small sound that changes everything. Around noon, I decided to drive into town. The roads shimmered with a thin layer of frost, and the radio played old songs that filled the quiet space between my thoughts. At a red light, I caught myself wondering if he would call me, maybe to ask what it all meant. But my phone stayed silent on the passenger seat. I wasn't surprised. Pride takes time to soften. When I reached the hardware store, the owner, Gus, waved at me from behind the counter. "Morning, Harlan. You look lighter today," he said. I laughed. Maybe I finally put something down I'd been carrying too long. I picked up a box of nails and some paint. Things I didn't really need, but bought anyway. Routine keeps an old man steady. Back home, I worked on fixing the fence. My hands knew the motion, my body the rhythm. Hammer, steady, repeat. I liked the sound. It reminded me that effort still mattered. While I worked, memories came in small flashes. The day I'd first shown my son how to use a saw. How proud he'd been when his rough little birdhouse stood on its own, tilted but solid. He used to look at me like I could fix anything. Somewhere along the way, that belief had faded, replaced by something colder, admiration mixed with distance. The sky turned gray in the late afternoon. I put away my tools and sat on the porch with a mug of tea. A pair of robins landed on the fence post, chattering as if the world didn't hold grudges. My phone finally buzzed. The screen showed his name. I hesitated for a moment before answering. His voice was tight, uncertain. "Dad, did you buy the house?" I took a slow sip before answering. "No," I said. "I didn't buy it. I gave it." Silence stretched between us, long and heavy. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. "Because you needed to feel like it was yours," I replied. "I just didn't expect you to forget who taught you what value means." He didn't respond right away. I could hear him breathing on the line, the sound of someone searching for words that wouldn't come. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Don't be sorry," I said. "Just understand." After we hung up, I sat there until the evening shadows reached my porch. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distance. Somewhere in that quiet, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not regret, but peace. The truth had finally reached him, and that was enough for now. The next day carried a strange calm, the kind that comes after a storm you didn't see but still felt. I woke up early again, made tea, and tried to start my morning as usual. But my thoughts kept drifting back to my son. I wondered what his night had been like after that phone call. Maybe he hadn't slept much. Maybe he had stared at those shiny walls, realizing for the first time that pride can sometimes feel heavier than debt. Around mid-morning, I got in my truck and drove toward the outskirts of town. The road curved through open fields before turning into neat suburban lanes, all lined with trimmed hedges and mailboxes that looked exactly the same. His house sat near the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of place people chose when they wanted to prove they had made it. His car was parked in the driveway, but I didn't go up right away. I parked across the street and watched the house for a while. Curtains moved in the front window, then stopped. I could almost feel his unease reaching across the glass. When I finally walked up the path, he opened the door before I could knock. His face looked different, less certain, more human. There were faint shadows under his eyes. He didn't invite me in right away. He just stood there, searching for something to say. "You knew?" he asked quietly. "You knew I thought it was mine?" I nodded. "I knew. I wanted you to feel proud of what you had built. I just hoped you'd remember who helped you learn to build." He stepped aside and let me in. The house looked the same as before, but the air felt different, less like a showpiece, more like a home trying to find its heart. We sat at the same dining table from the night before, the same silver plates, the same glasses. But there were no guests this time, no laughter pretending to belong. "I feel foolish," he said. "All that's talk about buying it myself, and the truth was sitting right across the table." "You're not foolish," I said, "just caught up in the idea that worth comes with price tags. I've seen a lot of men lose themselves chasing that idea." He looked down at his hands, silent for a while. Then he asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because if I had," I said, "you'd have treated this house like a gift, not a responsibility. Now you know the difference." For the first time in years, he smiled. Not the polite one he used for company, but the tired, honest kind that used to come so easily. It softened his whole face. "I don't deserve it," he said. "No," I answered. "You earned it, but not for the reasons. You think?" The quiet that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was the kind that fills the space between people when something finally makes sense. Outside, the wind picked up, moving through the trees. For the first time, I thought maybe that house might finally belong to him in the right way. Later that evening, the sky turned orange behind the rooftops as the sun dipped low, painting everything in the kind of light that makes even old mistakes look softer. My son had asked me to stay for dinner again, this time just the two of us. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already cooking, sleeves rolled up, an apron tied carelessly around his waist. It was the first time I'd seen him do that since he was a teenager. He greeted me with a quiet, "Hey, Dad," and pointed to the table. "I made stew. Thought you might like something simple." The smell filled the house, rich and earthy, not the kind of fancy food he used to order from restaurants. It reminded me of the meals his mother used to make when we didn't have much, but always made it feel like enough. I sat down while he ladled the soup into bowls. For a while we ate without talking. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It felt careful, like both of us were learning how to speak again after forgetting the language. Finally, he said, "When the realtor called, I thought it was some kind of mistake. I even told her she had the wrong number." I smiled faintly. "I figured you might." He set his spoon down and leaned back. "I kept thinking about why you'd do that. Why you'd give me something so big without saying anything." His voice cracked slightly on the word give. I folded my hands together. "Because that's what a father's supposed to do. Make sure his son has a place to stand, even if he doesn't always look back to see who built the ground. He stared at the table for a long time, then looked up. I didn't mean what I said yesterday about not touching anything. I was just nervous. I wanted to show people I wasn't that kid who used to borrow your truck and come home late. I know, I said gently, but pride has a way of sounding like shame when it's too loud. He nodded, his eyes wet. I wanted you to be proud of me. I always was, I said, even when you were failing, even when you didn't think I noticed. The words hung between us, and for the first time in years, there was no need to explain them. Outside, the wind rattled the windows softly. He reached into a drawer and pulled out the framed document that had hung crooked on the wall. The deed. I took it down this morning, he said. I think I'll keep it in a box for now. Maybe when I've earned the right to hang it again, I'll put it back up. I nodded slowly. That sounds about right. He smiled, a small, tired smile, but this time it reached his eyes. We finished dinner quietly, the kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. For the first time in a long while, the house felt like home. Not because of what it was made of, but because of what was finally being rebuilt inside it. When I drove home that night, the road stretched out under the soft hum of my old truck. The houses along the way glowed with porch lights and faint laughter leaking through open windows. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. There was something peaceful about knowing that the air between me and my son had finally cleared. Yet somewhere beneath that calm, another feeling stirred, a mix of reflection and sadness. You spend decades raising a child, teaching them what matters, only to realize that sometimes the lessons have to break them a little before they take root. At home, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the fireplace, letting the warmth creep into my bones. On the mantel, my wife's photograph watched me with that same quiet knowing she always had. I imagined what she might have said if she'd been there. Probably something simple like, "See? He just needed to find his way back." She always believed that time and truth worked better than anger. I hoped she was right. The next morning brought a chill that carried the first promise of winter. I went out to check the mailbox and found a small envelope tucked among the bills. My son's handwriting covered the front, neat and deliberate. Inside was a short note. "Dad, I can't undo yesterday or the years before, but I can start from where I should have been all along. Thank you for giving me what I didn't earn but now understand. Dinner soon, my treat." Your son? I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it inside my wallet. Maybe he didn't say much, but sometimes the fewest words carry the heaviest truth. I spent the rest of the day in my workshop out back. It was a small shed filled with old tools and the smell of sawdust, a place where time slowed down. I started sanding a piece of oak I'd been saving for months, meant to become a coffee table one day. As I worked, I found my rhythm again. Scrape, sand, breathe. The sound of wood against paper calmed me. When you've spent your life shaping things, it's hard to stop. There's comfort in creating something steady out of what begins rough. In the middle of my work, the phone rang. It was my neighbor, Margaret, asking if I could fix her broken porch railing before the cold set in. I said I'd be there by evening. She laughed, said she'd bake me a pie for my trouble. I told her to save that energy for her grandkids, but she insisted. I hung up smiling. Life, I realized, keeps offering little pieces of purpose if you stay open to them. Before heading out, I took a walk through my small backyard. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. I thought about all the years that had slipped by, the arguments, the silences, the stubborn pride that ran through both me and my boy like the same vein of metal and different stones. Maybe that's what made it so hard and so easy at the same time. We were two alike. That evening, when I fixed Margaret's railing, she stood nearby holding a flashlight, even though I didn't need it. "You still got the hands of a craftsman," she said. I smiled, tightening the last screw. Old hands just remember what they were taught. On my way home, I thought about how those same hands had built my son's home, each nail, each beam, and how, in their quiet way, they had given him something he couldn't see until the truth arrived on his doorstep. Back inside, I set down my tools and looked once more at my wife's photo. The fire flickered low, and for a brief second I could almost hear her voice again. "You did what you had to do, Harlan. He'll be better for it." Maybe she was right. Maybe the real inheritance wasn't the house, but the understanding that love doesn't always need to be loud to last. I sat there until the clock struck midnight, the house silent except for the soft ticking and the wind outside. It felt like something had finally settled, a long chapter closing not with a slam but with a sigh. The week moved slowly after that, like time itself was trying to stretch and make space for the changes that had started. My son called me every other evening, not to ask for help or advice, but just to talk. It felt unfamiliar at first, like handling something fragile that might break if I moved too quickly. But those talks became a quiet routine, something I started to look forward to. One night, as rain tapped gently on my roof, he told me he had invited a few of his friends back to the house for dinner. "I want to tell them the truth," he said. His voice didn't carry shame anymore, just calm certainty. "I want them to know I didn't build my life alone." I listened in silence for a moment before answering. "That's your choice," I said. "Just make sure you tell it because you want to, not because you owe it." He chuckled softly. "Maybe it's both." When the next weekend came, I drove to his place again. The same house that had once made me feel like a stranger now looked warmer, lived in. The bright white walls had small scuffs near the door, and the yard had footprints in the grass, signs of life. Through the front window I could see people talking, laughing, and a table set with food that looked more like home cooking than anything fancy. He saw me standing outside and opened the door before I could knock. "Dad, you came," he said, his smile wide and unguarded. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. Inside, the air smelled of roasted chicken and garlic. His guests greeted me politely, but this time there was no awkward silence, no uneasy glances toward my old jacket or my rough hands. My son introduced me properly, not as some quiet man visiting, but as the reason the house existed at all. He raised his glass halfway through dinner. "This house," he said, "was built twice. Once by hands and once by love. My father gave it to me before I even knew how much I needed it. I was foolish to think owning something made me someone. Turns out it's who stands beside you that matters." His words weren't rehearsed. They were heavy with truth. The table fell silent for a few seconds before filling with applause and small smiles. After everyone left, we sat outside on the back porch, the same one that had seemed too polished to stand on before. The wood was cool under my palms, the night air still. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I wasn't looking for thanks." He leaned back, eyes on the stars. "I know," he said, "but I needed to say it out loud, because I don't ever want silence to become our habit again." I looked at him then, not the boy who once ran through my half-finished job sites, not the man who once looked down on the dust under my boots, but someone who finally understood what I had tried to teach him all those years ago. That pride is good until it makes you blind, and love means more when it's spoken without expecting applause. Before I left that night, he walked me to my truck. "You know," he said with a small grin, "I fixed the crooked frame." I raised an eyebrow. "Did you now?" He nodded. "But I didn't hang the deed back. I put a photo of you and Mom there instead. That feels more like the truth." I didn't have words for that. I just placed my hand on his shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. Sometimes silence still speaks better than anything else. As I drove away, headlights cutting through the cool dark, I thought of how life has a quiet way of circling back, turning pride into humility and walls into bridges. For the first time in many years, I knew my son had finally learned what real ownership meant. A few days later, I woke before dawn. The house was still and cold, the kind of silence that sits heavy before the sun rises. I brewed coffee and stepped onto my porch, watching a faint line of gold stretch across the horizon. The world was waking slowly, and so was I in a different way. Life felt lighter now, though the memories of the past weeks still clung to me like dust that refuses to settle. When I sat down with my cup, my phone buzzed again. It was my son. This time, his message wasn't short. "Dad, I've been thinking about everything. About you. About the house. About what I was chasing. I know now that I was trying to prove something to everyone but myself. I want to do better. Would you come by this weekend? I need your help with something important." I didn't answer right away. I just smiled faintly and looked at the trees swaying beyond my fence. The idea that he was asking for my help, not money, not approval, but help, meant more than anything. When Saturday came, I loaded my truck with my old toolbox, some paint cans, and a bag of nails. I wasn't sure what he needed, but it felt right to come prepared. When I arrived, he was already outside, wearing old jeans and a shirt that looked like it had seen a few projects. He grinned when he saw me. "I was hoping you'd bring those tools," he said, nodding toward the box. "We're fixing this place up properly. You always said a house isn't really yours until you've worked on it yourself." That sentence alone warmed something deep inside me. For years, I'd tried to teach him exactly that. The pride of effort, the satisfaction of building rather than just buying. Together, we started by repainting the porch railings. He worked quietly, listening whenever I explained how to angle the brush for smoother strokes. It reminded me of when he was a boy, the same focus on his face, except now the hands beside mine were stronger, steadier, and full of intent. We worked through the morning. By noon, paint speckled our arms, the smell of fresh color filling the air. He laughed when he noticed a white streak across my forehead. "You missed a spot, old man," he said. I threw him a mock glare. "Careful, or I'll make you sand the whole deck again." It felt good to laugh together like that, light and easy. When we stopped for lunch, he brought out 2 sandwiches and some lemonade. We sat on the front steps, watching a few kids ride bikes down the street. "You know," he said, "I used to think success meant never needing anyone. I thought independence was everything. But now I realize the best things I have, the things that matter, came from people who stood by me." "That's the thing about building," I said. "You can't do it alone. Even a house needs something to hold it up." He nodded slowly, taking a long sip of his drink. "I've been talking to my boss about changing departments," he said after a pause. "I want to work more with people instead of sitting behind spreadsheets all day. Maybe even volunteer with that housing program you told me about." I couldn't hide my smile. That sounds like a fine idea. There was something almost poetic about it. Him finding purpose in helping others build what they needed, the same way I had all my life. Maybe the world really did find balance in its own time. As the afternoon faded, we fixed loose hinges, patched small cracks, and replaced a few tiles near the entryway. It wasn't grand work, but it made the place feel real, earned. Every swing of the hammer, every shared joke, seemed to close a bit more of the distance that had once stretched between us. When the last nail went in, he stepped back and looked around. "You know," he said softly, "I never realized how much of this house has your touch already. The beams, the pattern in the wood, it's all you." I nodded, wiping sweat from my brow. "That's because when I built it thinking about you. Every board, every corner was meant to keep you safe, even if you didn't know it." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You did more than keep me safe, Dad. You taught me what it means to deserve something." His voice cracked at the end, and he turned away quickly, pretending to look at the garden. I didn't press him. Some emotions are too heavy to speak directly. They're better left to linger between the lines. We stood there together, watching the sun begin to lower, its light bouncing off the windows we had just cleaned. The whole house seemed to glow in that golden hour. It wasn't the same kind of perfection it had when he first showed it off. It was better. It looked lived in, human, honest. Before I left that evening, he handed me a small box. "I found this in the storage room," he said. Inside was the wooden birdhouse we had built together decades ago. The paint was faded, but the shape was still solid. "Thought it belonged with you," he said. I shook my head. "No, son, hang it here. Let it remind you that good things last when they're built with care." He smiled and nodded, promising he would. As I drove home, the birdhouse stayed in my mind. The first thing we had ever built together, now hanging in the place that had nearly torn us apart but ended up bringing us closer than ever. The night sky spread above me, endless and calm. I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to fix things. Broken doors, cracked walls, even broken hearts. Some things I learned don't need fixing. They just need time and truth to find their right shape again. And finally, my son and I had found ours. The days that followed carried a rhythm I hadn't felt in years, a slow, steady peace that came from knowing something broken had been mended. My mornings started with small routines: boiling water for coffee, checking the mail, taking slow walks down the gravel road that curved behind my house. The world hadn't changed much, but my heart had. The sharp edges of old disappointments had softened, and where anger once sat, there was something gentler now. Maybe forgiveness isn't a single moment, but 100 quiet ones strung together over time. About a week later, my son called again. This time, his voice carried a kind of excitement I hadn't heard in him since he was a boy, building his first fort out of scrap wood. "Dad, I've got something to show you," he said. "It's a surprise, but I think you'll like it. Come by on Sunday." His tone was light, unguarded, but beneath it I could hear a tremor of emotion, like he was holding back something big. I told him I'd be there. That Sunday, the road to his neighborhood shimmered with heat. Spring was turning into early summer, and the air smelled of lilac and fresh-cut grass. As I pulled up to his driveway, I noticed a few cars parked along the curb. For a second, I hesitated, thinking maybe he was having another party. But this time, there were no strangers in suits or women with pearl necklaces waiting to be impressed. Just simple cars, one of them with tools and wooden planks in the back. He came out to greet me, grinning like a boy who'd done something good and couldn't wait to tell someone. "Dad, come inside," he said. "There's something I want you to see." When I stepped into the living room, I froze. The air smelled faintly of paint and sawdust, familiar and comforting. The space that had once been cold and spotless now looked different, warm, lived in, touched by real effort. But what caught my eye wasn't the new color on the walls or the curtains by the window. It was the large frame hanging where the house deed used to be. Inside it was a photo collage. In the center, there was a picture of me and my wife on our wedding day, surrounded by smaller photos. Me holding him as a baby, him standing beside me at job sites, the birdhouse we built together when he was 10. Around the border were handwritten words: "Built with love, owned with gratitude." I felt my throat tighten. I turned to look at him, and he was smiling softly, eyes glassy. "I wanted the truth to be on that wall," he said, "not a piece of paper." I didn't say anything right away. My voice felt too small for the weight sitting in my chest. Instead, I walked closer, tracing the edge of the frame with my fingertips. Every photo, every mark, carried years of memory. "You did this yourself?" I asked finally. He nodded. "I found the old photos in Mom's boxes. Took me a few days to put it all together. I figured, if this house is ours, it should have a heart. And that starts with you and her." I had lived a long time, seen many things, but in that moment, I couldn't remember ever feeling something so pure. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even joy. It was something quieter. Recognition. The kind that reminds you that love, when it's honest, always circles back. He led me into the backyard next, where a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, a few of his co-workers, even Margaret, my elderly neighbor, holding a pie in her hands. "What's all this?" I asked, laughing softly. "It's a small project," he said. We're helping the local housing program build porches and ramps for families who need them. I told him you were the man to teach us how to do it right. I blinked, taken aback. You want me to teach them? He grinned. Who else? You've been building more than houses your whole life. It's time everyone else learned how you do it. So that's how it began. One sunny afternoon with hammers, wood, and laughter. I taught them how to measure twice, cut once, how to make sure each board fits snug but not tight, how to smooth out the rough edges before the paint. They listened carefully, asking questions, making mistakes, then trying again. It felt good, watching them learn, seeing my son pass along instructions to others with patience and care. At one point, he leaned over to whisper, "You always said a man's work shows his heart." I think I finally get it now. I chuckled. Took you long enough? The day went on like that, full of small victories, each plank nailed, each smile earned. By late afternoon, we stood back and admired the finished porch, solid and simple. One of the younger workers asked, "Mr. Quinn, how do you know when it's good enough?" I thought for a second, then said, "When you trust it to hold someone you love." The boy nodded slowly, as if filing the answer somewhere deep. As evening crept in, everyone packed up. The sound of engines faded, leaving only the chirping of crickets. My son and I stayed behind, cleaning up stray nails and tools. "You know," he said, picking up a hammer, "this feels right. I spent years chasing titles and approval, but this, building something with my hands, this feels like me again." I nodded. "It suits you better than pretending ever did." He laughed softly, and for a while we didn't speak. The sun was setting, staining the sky a deep orange. He wiped sweat from his brow and said, "I've been meaning to tell you something. I met a family through the housing program, a couple with 2 young kids. They've been saving for years, but still can't afford a place of their own. I want to help them. Maybe fix up one of those old homes downtown." "That's a good thought," I said. "You planning to build it for them?" He hesitated. "I was thinking of doing what you did for me. Buy it quietly, fix it up, and hand them the keys when they're ready." I looked at him for a long moment. "You sure you're ready for that kind of giving?" He smiled gently. "Maybe it's time I learned how it feels on the other side." The wind carried the smell of sawdust and grass. I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it once. "Then make sure you do it for the right reasons," I said. "Not for pride, not for praise. Do it because you know what it means to build someone a foundation." He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I will." That night, as I drove home under a blanket of stars, I thought about how the story had turned, how the boy who once told me not to touch anything was now learning how to create something worth holding. And maybe that's what life is about. Not perfection, not control, but learning how to give, break, and rebuild until everything stands firm again. When I reached my house, I turned off the truck and sat for a while, hands resting on the steering wheel. I thought about my wife, about all the years I'd worked without rest, about how love had stretched itself through time and memory, waiting for this moment. Finally, I stepped out, looked up at the stars, and whispered, "He's finally home." And for the first time in many years, I felt like I was too. A few weeks rolled by, and the summer air settled thick over the valley. My days filled with small things again, fixing a broken fence post for a neighbor, tending to the tomatoes, in the garden and watching the evening light spill through the same window I'd looked out of for decades. But there was a difference now. Every sound, every quiet hour felt steadier. The heaviness that used to sit on my chest had lifted, replaced by something like peace. My son and I spoke often. Sometimes it was about little things, what he'd cooked for dinner, how work was going, what the weather was like in his part of town. But more often it was about the house. He'd started calling it our house instead of his. Each time he said it, it made me smile in a way I couldn't quite explain. That small word, our, carried the weight of all we'd been through. It was no longer about property or ownership. It was about belonging. One Friday evening he called again. "Dad, he said. "I need your opinion on something. You got a minute?" "Always," I replied, setting down my book. "I've been working with the housing program more," he continued, a spark in his voice. "There's this old property on the south side of town. Needs a lot of work, but the bones are good. We're thinking of turning it into a community space, a workshop, maybe even a shelter during winter. But I want to do it right this time. Thought I could use your eye for it." I leaned back in my chair, smiling to myself. "You want my help building another place?" He laughed. "Looks that way. Except this time, you'll be working for me." I chuckled softly. "Careful, boy, you can't afford my rates anymore." We agreed to meet the next morning. The sun was already bright when I arrived. The house stood at the edge of town, old and tired but proud. Its porch sagged and the paint peeled like thin bark, yet the frame stood strong. "Looks like it's seen better days," I said, running my hand along a cracked post. "Yeah," he admitted, "but I see something in it." That's when I realized how much he'd changed. Where he once saw value only in perfection, now he saw potential in what was worn. It reminded me of myself when I was younger, seeing life not in how things were, but in what they could become. We spent the day inspecting the place, jotting notes on repairs, measurements, and costs. The air smelled of old wood and dust, and beams of sunlight filtered through gaps in the ceiling. I could see it all in my head already. The floor refinished, the walls sanded smooth, a long table in the middle for shared meals or lessons. "You know," I said, standing in the empty living room, "this house is a lot like people. It creaks, it leans, but it's still standing. All it needs is care." He nodded slowly, running a hand across the banister. "You always see things that way," he said. "I used to think you just liked fixing things. Now I get it. You fix them because you believe they're worth saving." I looked at him then and felt the kind of pride that has nothing to do with money or success. "That's right," I said. "Everything worth building takes time, and most things worth keeping don't come easy." We started working every weekend after that. Neighbors joined in, bringing food and laughter. What began as a repair job turned into a gathering place. Kids painted walls, women planted flowers along the walkway, and old men like me taught younger ones how to drive nails straight. The sound of hammers, saws, and voices blended like music. One afternoon, while taking a break, I caught my son standing at the edge of the yard, watching the volunteers. His eyes followed every movement, every act of care. "You see it?" I asked, stepping beside him. He nodded. "Yeah, it feels alive." "That's because people built it together," I said. "A house holds more than walls. It holds every hand that touched it." He turned to me with a quiet smile. "You know, I think I used to be afraid of your silence, Dad. When you didn't say much, I thought you were disappointed. But now I understand. You were just waiting for me to learn." I didn't reply. I just placed my hand on his shoulder, the same way I used to when he was small and unsure of himself. Sometimes silence still spoke best. As the days passed, the building transformed. The walls that had been faded and cracked now gleamed with new paint. The floors, once uneven, shone under the soft glow of hanging bulbs. We added wide steps at the entrance so wheelchairs could roll through easily. My son insisted on building the railing himself, measuring and cutting every board with care. I watched him work, his brow furrowed, his motions precise, the same patience I once had when I built his childhood home. When the last nail went in, we stood back together. "It's done," he said softly. "Can't believe it." "It's never really done," I said. "A place like this grows with the people who walk through it. You just started the first chapter." He smiled, eyes glinting. "Then I hope it's a long story." A week later, we held a small opening for the space. Nothing grand, just the people who'd helped. A table of food and music playing from an old radio. Kids ran through the hallways, laughter bouncing off the walls that had once been silent. My son stood in front of the group and said, "When I first got my house, I thought ownership meant keeping others out. But this place taught me that real ownership means opening the door. His words hit me like a soft blow to the chest. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't hide it. There was no need. After the crowd left, he and I sat on the front steps as dusk settled. The air was warm and heavy with the smell of sawdust and earth. "I think Mom would have liked this," he said quietly. "She would have loved it," I replied. "She always said a home wasn't about walls. It was about who you welcomed inside." He nodded, looking out at the street where lights flickered on one by one. "I used to think I had everything when I bought that big house," he said. "Now I realize I didn't have anything until I learned to give." I smiled, feeling the same calm warmth I'd felt the day he was born. "That's the secret most people miss," I said. "It's not about what you own. It's about what you build that lasts beyond you." He was quiet for a while, thinking. Then he turned to me and asked, "Dad, do you ever regret giving me that house? You could have kept it, rented it out, done something else with it." I shook my head slowly. "No, son, I don't regret a thing, because what I gave you wasn't a house. It was a lesson, and seeing what you've done now, I know you learned it." He exhaled, leaning back on his hands, looking up at the darkening sky. I wish I'd understood sooner. "You understood when you were ready," I said. "That's how life works. Lessons come when they're meant to." The street fell quiet, except for the low hum of crickets. The sky had deepened to a shade of indigo, the stars scattered bright and clear. I thought of how far we had come, from the day he told me not to touch anything to this moment, where everything he touched carried kindness. Before I left that night, he walked me to my truck again. The porch light cast a golden ring around us. "Dad," he said, his voice soft but steady, "thank you for the house, for your patience, for everything." I smiled. "Just promise me one thing," I said. "Don't let what you build become just another thing to show off. Keep it alive by sharing it." "I will," he said. "I swear I will." As I drove away, I looked in the mirror one last time. He stood there at the gate, watching until my truck disappeared into the dark. I knew then that the story wasn't really about a house anymore. It was about a bond rebuilt from silence, about pride that had finally learned to bow to love, and about a man who'd found his way home by remembering where he came from. And as the night stretched on, the road glinting faintly under the moonlight, I felt certain of one thing. Some gifts don't end when you give them away. They live on, brick by brick, in the hearts they rebuild. A month later, summer had deepened into the kind of heat that pressed down on the streets and made the air shimmer like glass. I had slowed my pace, doing small chores early in the morning and spending the afternoons under the shade of the porch, with a glass of cold lemonade. My hands still itched for work, but my heart had learned to rest. The house across town, the one my son and I had restored for the community, had become a small landmark. Folks started calling it the Quinn House, though I never liked hearing my name attached to it. It wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had lifted a hammer or carried a plank. One Saturday, my son stopped by unannounced. His car pulled up just as I was trimming the hedge. He got out with a grin that told me something was brewing. "Dad," he said, "get dressed. We're going somewhere." I laughed. "At my age, you can't just pull a surprise like that on me. Where are we going?" "You'll see," he said, "but I promise it's worth the drive." He was right. About an hour later, we pulled into the parking lot of a small community center on the south side of town. The building looked freshly painted, bright and full of life. A banner hung over the entrance that read, "Home is built, not bought." Below it, in smaller letters, "Quinn Foundation, Building Hope, one home at a time." I froze, staring up at the sign. "What's this?" I asked quietly. He turned to me with that same proud but humble smile I'd come to know again. "It's what we started, Dad. The housing program needed a steady hand to lead future projects. I told them about you, about what you taught me. They wanted to name the foundation after you." I took a step closer, my throat tightening. "You shouldn't have. I didn't do it to flatter you. he said quickly. I did it because everything I know about building, giving, and standing tall came from you. You gave me a house, Dad. I want to give others a home. Inside, volunteers were busy sorting supplies: paint cans, wood, nails, tool belts. On the wall hung photographs from the last few months. Families smiling in front of freshly repaired houses, kids waving from new porches, mothers wiping tears of joy. Each image seemed to tell a small story of gratitude. He led me to a desk near the front, where a stack of blueprints lay spread out. We've got our next project lined up, he said. A single mother with 3 kids. Roofs falling in, plumbing shot. We're starting next week. I ran my fingers over the plans, tracing the lines that showed new walls and beams. You're leading this one? I asked. He nodded. But only if you'll be there beside me. I didn't answer right away. The smell of sawdust, the sound of laughter, the murmur of purpose. It all filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt since my younger years. All right, I said finally. But if I'm helping, we're doing it my way. No shortcuts. He grinned. Wouldn't have it any other way. Over the next few weeks, we worked side by side again. The job wasn't easy. The summer heat made every nail feel heavier, every beam harder to lift. But the people who came to help made the work feel lighter. There were teenagers learning how to build, retirees eager to feel useful again, and families who brought food and water every day. Everyone gave what they could. The mother whose house we were fixing often stood nearby, her youngest child clinging to her hand. She'd watch us with quiet eyes, always whispering thank you whenever someone carried in new materials. I caught my son talking to her one afternoon. He bent down to show her boy how to hold a hammer properly. The child's laughter echoed through the half-built walls, and I had to look away for a moment. It was the same sound I used to hear when my son was small. When the house was finished, we gathered on the lawn for a small celebration. The mother hugged each of us, tears streaking her dusty face. You didn't just fix my roof, she said. You fixed our future. My son handed her the new house key, his voice steady but low. This is yours now, he said. No debt, no condition. Just a home. I felt something deep inside me settle in that moment. It was the same feeling I'd had the morning the realtor called him about the gift, the quiet satisfaction that comes when love finally circles back. As the crowd dispersed, my son came to stand beside me. You know, he said, I used to think your kind of love was quiet because you didn't know how to say it. Now I understand. It was quiet because it was steady, because it didn't need to prove itself. I smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe words just get in the way sometimes. He nodded, looking at the house glowing in the late light. You think Mom would be proud? She already is, I said. She's in every wall we build. Later that evening, after the volunteers had left, we sat on the porch steps together, our tools resting beside us. The sun sank low, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold. For a long time we didn't speak. The air buzzed softly with the sounds of crickets starting their nightly song. Finally, he said, Dad, there's something else I've been thinking about. I want to give you something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key attached to a leather strap. It's to the office back at the foundation. I want you to have it. You don't have to work every day, but it's yours. You started this. I turned the key in my hand, feeling its weight. I don't need an office, I said quietly. I just need a place to build. He smiled. Then it's both, a place to build and to belong. We sat there a while longer, watching the last of the light fade. I could see his reflection in the window beside us. Older now, wiser, with traces of me in his posture and his patience. I realized then that these small moments of shared understanding, was the real inheritance I'd hoped to leave behind. When I drove home that night, the sky was dark and endless, the stars sharp and bright. I passed the rows of houses we'd worked on, each one standing strong and full of life. And I thought to myself, maybe every father builds 2 homes, one of wood and one of heart. The first can crumble, but the second, if made with love, will stand for generations. At home, I poured a small glass of whiskey and stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The world outside was changing fast, but for once, I didn't feel left behind. I had done what I came here to do, not just build, but teach, not just give, but guide. And my son, the same boy who once told me not to touch anything, was now building homes for others to touch, live in, and call their own. As I turned off the light, I whispered softly into the darkness, "That's enough, Harlan. You've done your part." Then I went to bed, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Rest easy, knowing the hands that once built for me would keep on building long after mine were still. Autumn came quietly that year. The trees on my street began to shed their leaves, blanketing the sidewalks in a soft carpet of orange and gold. The air grew cooler, and mornings brought that faint smell of smoke from distant fireplaces. Life, in its gentle way, had come full circle. The noise that once filled my mind, the disappointment, the anger, the pride, had settled into something simpler: peace. I had grown used to the slower rhythm of my days. Some mornings I drove to the community workshop to lend a hand. Other times I stayed home, tinkering in my shed, keeping my tools oiled and sharp. I was still building things, just smaller now: bird feeders, wooden frames, little shelves for neighbors who asked politely and stayed for coffee. But every nail I hammered carried a piece of memory from the journey that had led me here. My son visited often, sometimes alone, sometimes with his wife, sometimes with the volunteers from the foundation. They all called me Mr. Quinn, with a mix of respect and affection, though my son refused to. To him, I was still just Dad. He had changed so much. His once polished hands were now rough from work, his voice steady, his shoulders broad with quiet confidence. The kind of man, I thought, that any father would be proud to see his son become. One afternoon in late October, he called and said, "Dad, there's something I'd like you to see. Come to the foundation tomorrow morning." When I arrived, the building looked busier than ever. Trucks lined the parking lot, and inside, people were carrying boxes, laughing, and sorting through blueprints. He came toward me with a wide grin. "We're expanding," he said. "The city granted us more land. We're going to build 6 new homes this year instead of 3. I raised an eyebrow. "You're going to need a lot of hands for that," he smiled. "We already have them. People have been signing up for weeks. They heard about what we've been doing, about you, and they want to help." He led me through a new wing of the building. On one wall hung a large mural, painted scenes of houses, families, and workers side by side. At the center of the mural, a man stood holding a hammer, his face turned upward, as if looking at something unseen. The resemblance was unmistakable. I stopped in front of it, stunned. "That looks an awful lot like me," I said, half smiling. He nodded. "It is. They wanted the mural to show where this all began. I told them it started with one man's hands, one act of quiet love." I felt something move in my chest, a slow ache mixed with gratitude. I wasn't used to being seen that way, not as a symbol, not as a story. I had lived my whole life behind the walls I built for others, never expecting anyone to write my name on one. But seeing it there, I realized it wasn't about recognition. It was about legacy, about leaving something behind that would outlive us both. He placed a folded piece of paper in my hand. "I want you to read this," he said softly. It was a letter addressed to me in his handwriting. I opened it carefully. "Dad, there was a time when I thought success meant standing above everyone else. You showed me that real success means standing beside them. I used to think you were quiet because you had nothing to say. Now I know your silence was full of lessons I wasn't ready to hear. You gave me everything without asking for thanks, but I'm giving it now. Thank you for the house, the patience, and for believing I could be more than my mistakes. You built more than homes. You built me. Your son." I folded the letter slowly and tucked it into my coat pocket. The words sat heavy and bright in my chest. I looked around the room again. The people, the energy, the purpose. And I realized this wasn't just my son's foundation anymore. It had become something much larger, a living proof that a single act of love can multiply until it becomes an entire movement. We walked outside together, where the morning sun stretched across the parking lot. The air was crisp, full of life. He turned to me and said, "We're naming the new set of homes the Maria Row, after Mom." I figured it was time her name stood where her heart always belonged. I swallowed hard, blinking against the light. "She'd have liked that," I said quietly. "She'd have said, 'About time you did something with her name other than argue.'" He laughed, and I joined him. It felt good to laugh about her again, to remember her warmth without the sting of loss. That evening, when I returned home, I sat in my workshop for a long while. The light from the setting sun poured through the window, touching the tools on my bench. I ran my hand along the handle of my old hammer, its wooden grip smooth from decades of use. My wife had once called it my second heartbeat. I smiled at that memory, then set it down carefully. I thought about the long road that had led here, the cold silence of that first Christmas when I'd been turned away, the bitterness that had built like rust in my chest, and how one simple truth had unraveled it all. Love given freely will always find its way home. Outside, I could hear laughter drifting down the street, children chasing one another through the leaves, the sound of a ball bouncing off the sidewalk. Somewhere the world was still moving forward, still being built, one nail, one hand, one heart at a time. I stood and walked to the small shelf near the door. Hanging from a nail was the birdhouse my son had restored, the one we'd built when he was 10. He'd dropped it off last week, newly painted, the roof sealed and polished. "It's strong again," he'd said, "just needed care." I lifted it gently and stepped outside. The evening sky was fading into shades of purple and gold. I hung the birdhouse on the old maple tree near the fence, the same tree that had stood there since the day we moved in. A breeze stirred its branches, and for a moment I could almost swear I heard my wife's laughter in the leaves. I looked up, whispering, "It's all right now. He found his way." And in that quiet space between heartbeats, I felt something close, like a hand resting on my shoulder, gentle and certain. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was grace, but it was enough. That night, before turning in, I wrote a small note and pinned it to the wall above my workbench. It read, "Build with love, forgive with time, leave the rest to those who learn after you." The next morning, when sunlight streamed through the blinds, I woke with an easy heart. My son stopped by later, unannounced as usual, carrying coffee and 2 pastries. We sat on the porch without speaking much, watching a few birds dart in and out of the new house hanging on the tree. Life had come full circle. He looked over at me and said quietly, "You know, Dad, I think you were right all along." "About what?" I asked. "About how love builds stronger walls than money ever could." I smiled, nodding. "Took you a while, but you got there." He chuckled, sipping his coffee. "Yeah, but the view from here was worth it." We sat there for a long time, 2 builders, 2 generations, bound not by the houses we'd built, but by the lessons that built us. The porch creaked softly beneath our chairs. The wind rustled through the trees, and the birdhouse swayed gently in the breeze, a small, perfect reminder of everything we'd learned about life, pride, forgiveness, and love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us that love, forgiveness, and family are the strongest foundations of all. Share your thoughts in the comments. What did this story make you feel? And remember, some gifts don't come wrapped in paper. They come built with love.